that the Nephilim, as described in Genesis 6, this race of giant people who are a hybrid between the spirit world and the human world, and they're the reason that God sent the flood. This is all described in Genesis. They were giants.
Throughout the history of the organization, we have records of them receiving bones of giants and artifacts that are kind of hard to explain in apocryphal works like Book of Enoch. We're describing angels, but describing them in a way that sound kind of like the Birdman.
Tucker Carlson gets stunned when he hears about evidence for giants, and he brings up the Nephilim within the Bible. And the Y-Files tries to explain his best, and I'm going to be given a Christian perspective. But first, he brings up the pyramids and what exactly is going on there.
What do we know about the pyramids? What do we actually know, rather than what we've been told? But like, what can we be certain of?
Be certain of? I don't think we can be certain of anything. Like, we can't be certain of when they were built. Some of them we can, but the pyramids are strange because it seems like the ones that were built earlier are more perfect than the later pyramids, which suggests that maybe, certainly I subscribe to the theory that the Egyptians did not build like the like Khufu. I think they found that. I think they found that and then tried to replicate it later on and couldn't quite get it right.
Why don't we know when they were built?
Well, you can't carbon date it.
But what about the mummies we found inside all the pyramids?
I've never found a mummy in a pyramid. Never.
What?
We've never found a mummy in a pyramid.
I thought the mummies were...
No, people say that there are tombs, but they really haven't found any. They found mummies other places.
From the pyramids?
No, they're not. No mummy's been found in a pyramid. Maybe they were placed in certain structures later on, like Valley of the Kings and so forth. But like the Great Pyramid of Giza, no mummy's been found there. There's a giant box in the king's chamber that's said to be a sarcophagus, but it's not the right shape or size for a mummy.
Huh. So there are no organic objects found in the Great Pyramid, for example, that would suggest when it was built?
No organics, no.
Huh.
But there are strange things about the pyramid, like chemical residue at certain openings, shafts, that suggest maybe the pyramid had other uses that are really not acceptable to mainstream.
Of the objects that have been found in the pyramids and the tombs, are there any that we can't explain?
Any that we can't explain? I don't think so. There's a lot of objects that we are not allowed to see.
Still,
sure. I mean, look at the Smithsonian. I think has 1 billion artifacts. We're not allowed to see hardly any of those. They kind of just swoop in and just take those. So I don't think there's any unexplainable objects.
Can you petition the Smithsonian to see artifacts?
Sure, you can. But you're not going to be able to do that. Smithsonian is a weird organization. Throughout the history of the organization, we have records of them receiving bones of giants and artifacts that are kind of hard to explain. We have records of them receiving it, but then they lose them or they deny ever having them. And the Smithsonian, which is a government institution, is exempt from a lot of law. Like, not too long ago, a law was passed that if any museums are in possession of tribal, like Native American artifacts, specifically funeral artifacts, they're to be returned to the tribes.
Bones,
anything, except the Smithsonian. They don't have to do that.
Why? The Smithsonian seems to be covering up everything. Like, I always have this thought process. What if all of this is just some big conspiracy? And really, they're not hiding anything. They just literally have nothing to show. And that's why they can't. And it seems like they're hiding anything because they don't have anything. But another part of me really gets so suspicious that they're not revealing the truth.
May I ask, okay, so a couple things, but I don't want this to slip by. So you're referring to the claim that the Nephilim, as described in Genesis 6, this race of giant people who are a hybrid between the spirit world and the human world, and they're the reason that God sent the flood. This is all described in Genesis. They were giants. They were great men of old, I think is the phrase. The claim from some people is that's actually real, and the fossil record proves it's real because giant bones, human bones, have been found through the years, and that some or a lot of them wound up in the Smithsonian where their existence was suppressed.
Yes.
And you're saying there's actually documentary evidence that may be true?
Yes, there's documentary.
That's crazy. But it's all a cover-up.
evidence that the Smithsonian has received bones and large coffins from not that long ago. We're talking maybe the 50s or 60s. And as recently as the 80s, people have been trying to get access to this information, but they're stonewalled, or they just don't have it. And there was one case where the Smithsonian said, yes, we did receive the bones, but we don't know where they are. And
well, if you received human bones that were larger than any human bones ever described in literature ever, other than Genesis 6, kind of a big story, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and you see that.
I mean, it is described in other literatures. In the Bible, the Epic of Gilgamesh is a giant too, but
repeated over and over again, especially in America, for hundreds of years. Even native tribes have stories about giants, having wars with giants, driving giants across the country to, the famous one is the Lovelock Cave, which is in California. These are the red-headed giants. And red hair has been found in that cave, and giant sandals and clothing that is enormous.
Actually?
Yes, on display. But it's always an explanation. Oh, it's symbolic, it's allegory, or whatever it is. But that's not what the native people say. They say that this was a cannibalistic tribe that they cornered in a cave and sealed it and set them on fire, essentially. And if you go to that cave, there is residue of the fire. There was one tribal leader who wore strands of red hair in her clothing for years. Could look her up. She's pretty famous.
So
okay, this is apparently her, but let's read what it says. People really need to read Sarah Winnemaka's book called Life Among the Peyote. It's about Lovelock Cave and her ancestral tribe that chased the red-haired giants into the cave. They were tired of their terrorizing their tribe and eating their people. They started a fire at the cave entrance, which there is proof of its entrance. The giants were killed as they tried to escape the cave. The fire suffocated the remaining giants. She also knitted a shawl made of the red hair from the giant, which she is wearing in the picture below. The giant bones were discovered by Guano miners in 1911. The Smithsonian's confiscated the 10-foot tall skeletons with double rows of teeth, which were found underneath the 40-some-odd bodies and animal parts, and covered it up. They magically disappeared and told everybody that the bodies and animal parts, and told everybody that the story was a myth. There's also eyewitness testimonies in the Lovelock papers in 1911. There also was a giant skeleton found in San Diego, California, with a newspaper clip pictured on the right, but I guess they were all lying too. Wow, and here's the lady. That's insane. And where's this hair? Is it made with the hair?
Maybe, maybe not. It would be hard to say.
it's just hard to see why red-headed people would be on the North American continent.
I mean, talking about like Neanderthal DNA.
Yeah, I mean, why would they be red-headed? Like, none of the people we believe lived on this continent before the Europeans arrived were red-headed. They were all dark-haired.
True, but if it's giants, then this is DNA that's still a little different than ours. So maybe that's what they were.
Has this ever been tested by anybody?
No.
Why would the U.S. government have an interest, clearly they do, in suppressing this and waving people off?
Boy, I hate to say I don't know so many times, but I really don't. There's a famous story about connected to giants about G.E. Kincaid, who explored the Grand Canyon. This is the early 1900s, I think like 1908, 1909. And his story ended up in the Arizona Gazette, where he was kind of rowing down the Colorado River, and he finds these steps that go into a hole in the side of the canyon. And he goes and he explores it, and he's kind of mapping it. And inside he finds basically the remains of an ancient city, artifacts, a giant statue that kind of looks like Buddha, but not quite, hieroglyphics that kind of look Egyptian, but not quite. And he comes out and he's putting together an expedition, and when it's time to go back and explore, he never shows up. And that story was in the papers. What bothers me about that one, it's one of the mysteries that I really wish I knew, is that you can find that opening in the Grand Canyon, and it's covered with an iron gate. And above that area of the canyon is a no-go zone. You cannot go there, you can't walk there. But some people have. And you can see embedded into the top of the cliff there iron hooks and equipment that would be used maybe to rappel down the side of the cliff. But when you do go there, suddenly white planes will appear. And you can't fly over the Grand Canyon, but these white unmarked planes
Can't fly over the Grand Canyon.
No. And black helicopters will appear.
So many people claim that this is not true, and they constantly fly over all the time.
And you can't do that over the Grand Canyon. You can see this episode on my channel where I linked to the full video of these people going up there, and there are the helicopters, and there's the plane. And eventually their park rangers or whatever throw them off the property. That bothers me. And,
you think?
And nobody will tell us why.
So I've never heard any of that before, but as a general matter, there's very clearly a coordinated, longstanding effort by the U.S. government, specifically U.S. government, to bat away speculation about the past.
Yes.
And to shut down any thinking about whether or not the things we're looking at could be supernatural in any way. They're all natural phenomena. That's what we know. But anything that suggests like supernatural is just ruthlessly put down.
I wouldn't see giants as supernatural. That's an animal. That's a creature. That's a mammal. That's
right.
So I don't know why that is so dangerous.
I don't either. I mean, but that's kind of
Well, the story is, though, they would be partially supernatural if they were Nephilim. Maybe that's what they're hiding. Maybe that's why he's so confused. It's like, why in the world would they be hiding this? If it's just like any other animal, just like any other dinosaur that they're finding. But really, it's a hybrid of something completely different. That's why.
like you see the truth in the reaction, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, why do you care?
Right. For how long, how long were the Clovis people were the first people in America? And that was, if you said that anyone was here before them, you were ridiculed. But we keep finding artifacts that are older and older and thousands of years older. And of course, nobody from the Pacific could have made it to the Americas that long ago. But that's been proven that tribes in East Ecuador on the Atlantic side have DNA from Polynesian people. That goes back thousands of years.
Yeah, I've heard that.
So there has been contact of civilizations going back as far as we can remember.
Clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that from sacred art, ancient art on, 5 different continents. We see the same images, the Birdman, the purse.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think you've done work on this, and it's like, what is the explanation for that? How could people living on separate continents before transatlantic communication come up with precisely the same images? Clearly, they're responding to something that they're all seeing,
Yes,
or they
they
must be communicating. So what is that? The Birdman, for example, this image, which is throughout Latin and North America, also Europe, also Africa, also the Near East, also the Far East. It's a sacred image carved on walls, on pottery, of a bird-faced man with wings. What is that? How they all think of it? Easter Island.
Easter Island is also very, very strange. The Birdman, I think, boy, I can get really woo-woo with this. It could be a metaphor for a sky god. It could be,
or an angel.
or
Well, that could be the whole idea, is that that's what they worship. And was it actually a deity, as in some spiritual being that they were worshiping, that it was conveying and showing itself to? That could be the case. That could be literally what's going on. I don't think it's an accident. I don't think they're just coming up with stuff on their own. I think that they are having these spiritual encounters, not the good kind.
angel.
Looks a lot like the angels described in the Old Testament, just saying.
It does. And there are plenty of passages in both Old and New Testament, and even in apocryphal works like Book of Enoch, where describing angels, but describing them in a way that sound kind of like the Birdman, or sound almost like an alien entity. I think it was maybe the Book of Daniel describes a man who's glowing with topaz. And Elijah was taken up to heaven. No one's allowed to mortally go to heaven, but he was taken and shown.
He's the only person to not die as well. Enoch. Elijah was taken on a chariot of fire. For what reason? Only God knows.
And Ezekiel talks all about visions of this futuristic city that he thought was going to be a new Temple of Solomon, but it sounds like a city. And in
That's after he describes UFOs as wheels in the sky and all that.
those are the wheel, but that shows up over and over again. And Enoch is also taken up by Uriel and shown how the winds are made. And he describes the heavens in ways that we were not supposed to know at that time. So there's something to it. All religions have these. If the Vedic texts have very similar stories to these, where Arjuna goes up and sees the heavens and sees these flying vehicles that were called Vimana. That Vimana are described in such detail that they describe the technology of how they worked with rotating Mercury and engineering specifications in texts that are 1000 BC. Same with Buddhist, Hindu. It's all very similar stories.
Can we get back to the pyramids?
Yes.
So we don't know when they were built. Because how could we know? But the Egyptian government and the archaeological community is totally vested in telling us they know exactly when these were built. But in point of fact, we don't know and can't know. No mummies have been found in the pyramids. I didn't know that till you told me. But critically, from my perspective, it was like, how were they built? Do we know?
We don't really know. The conventional story is ramps and pulleys.
Right.
But I think it's been mathematically shown that the amount of ramps and pulleys and equipment that you would need to build the pyramids would exceed the weight of the pyramids themselves. I mean, how long does the
Really?
ramp have to be to go up? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
No one can really explain it. And the precision of how these stones were cut, we can only barely match it now. And this is supposed to be Bronze Age,
Yes.
done with bronze,
Soft metal. Yeah.
soft metal, cutting the hardest granite in the world. It defies explanation, but that's the explanation. And why is the pyramid made of all these different materials? Why not just make it out of the whatever sandstone you have lying around? Why bring it?
I think they're 2.5 tons each. To think about how hard that would be to physically move that is insane.
Tour limestone? Why use rose granite in certain places?
I didn't know that.
Well, rose granite is very special because it's highly piezoelectric, meaning if you apply pressure to it, it creates voltage. So that's one of the theories about the pyramid is the grand gallery leading up to the king's chamber is lined with rose granite. You don't see it anywhere else in the pyramid. So that's highly conductive. The exterior of the pyramid was covered in Tour limestone, which is an insulator. So you have this structure that's almost designed like an electricity generator. And then you have the queen's chamber and some other shafts where there's chemical residue that when combined create an enormous amount of hydrogen gas that then flows up through the grand gallery, expands, creates electricity with this rose granite, which ionizes the air. And then at the time, there were these slats, 24 slats of wood that would create sound and which would amplify. And what's strange is leading from the grand gallery into the king's chamber is a small hole. I forget what it was. Maybe it's 3 by 6. It just happens to be the right size to be a waveguide for hydrogen atoms. So those flow then into the king's chamber, and this resonates at a frequency. I think it's 440 hertz. It's like an F sharp. And then above the king's chamber is a stone called a relieving stone. And this is said to help relieve the pressure coming from the top of the pyramid. The thing is, it doesn't connect to anything. It's perfectly flat on the bottom, but it's chipped on the top, almost as if someone was chipping away, almost like a tuning fork to get the right frequency. Now, I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying there's a lot of science there that makes you wonder, why go through all this trouble for a tomb? And there's no writing in there.
There's no writing in the Great Pyramid?
No, there's no writing in there. There was some writing found in an expedition, I think it was in the 80s, where a robot was sent in. They found a door with copper handles, which are not supposed to be there. Then the other side of the door it looked like hieroglyphics, but they were not. And that eventually was suppressed. And the explanation was, well, that was like the signature of the masons who built it or something like that. Well, let's have a look at that footage. Well, you can't really get a hold of that.
What?
So there's all these strange things about the pyramid that we just can't go. We can't dig. I don't know if you saw my episode on the Labyrinth
No.
at Hawara, but that one really bothers me because that's an ancient legend that goes back to Herodotus and even before, talked about this labyrinth in Hawara. It's about 50 miles from Cairo. That this labyrinth was enormous, 3,000 rooms, and the priest said this was built by the ancient kings. Oh, you mean the pharaohs? And they said no, the ones before, from Zep-Tepi, which was the first time. Well, the labyrinth was talked about by Herodotus, by Pliny, by Strabo, by all these famous historians. It's there, it's bustling. And eventually it just sort of disappears from history and becomes a legend. Well, it gets rediscovered in the early, late 19th century. And
During the colonial period.
yes, but we're not allowed to dig or go down there. But recent technology like ground penetrating radar, LiDAR from space, shows that there's stuff down there. The explorer who found it thought he found the foundation of the labyrinth and was very excited about it. It turned out what he found was the roof. So the LiDAR is showing these giant spaces underneath the ground that are feet thick of heavy granite with all these spaces in between. And in the center of this giant atrium is a 150-foot metallic ring that nobody can explain.
Whoa.
And boy, I'd like permission to dig or see what's down there. And the tragedy is the water table is eroding all of that away. And geologists are saying, look, we have to preserve this because this is going to be gone in 100 years, 200 years. We can't stop that.
So annoying. Why in the world do they not want you to discover or understand or get to know? That's something that is so fishy and so mind-boggling to me. But I just wish that all these people who would look into this type of theories would also take the same amount of consideration in Jesus Christ and look at what Jesus actually did based off of the evidence, based off of the archaeological evidence. Because Jesus is who he said he was, and he died on the cross for our sins. That's known from the Bible and outside of the Bible. Other sources claim this fact. If you've never decided to do that, I encourage you to do that today. Look into Jesus. Look into what he could do for you and realize that we're all sinners. We've all fallen short of the glory of God and we need a savior. So I encourage you, if you never did that, there will be a link in the description you can click to help you to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that today. It will be the best decision you could ever make. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I encourage you to hit the like button and subscribe. And always remember, guys, Jesus loves you.